Please also feel free to use the chat function at any time to introduce yourselves or to ask a question. I want to just give you a little introduction to who the Toxic Use Reduction Institute is. So we're one of 3 arms of the Massachusetts Toxic Use Reduction Program, which was promulgated in 1989. The act was promulgated in 1989. We focus on research, education, and policy analysis designed to help companies and communities in Massachusetts reduce their use of toxic chemicals. During the COVID-19 crisis, TURI's work to identify and evaluate safer alternatives to toxic chemicals comes into sharp focus for a number of critical reasons. We know that effective surface cleaning and disinfection are critical to reducing pathogen spread. However, research shows that many common cleaning and disinfecting chemicals and practices may present significant risks to health and the environment. Exposure to toxic chemicals can lead to respiratory sensitization or immune system suppression that can create vulnerabilities to pathogens like the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. And finally, reducing illness caused by toxic chemical exposures lowers the burdens put on our healthcare system, So it's important to do toxic use reduction. The work that we'll be hearing about today derives from a community project that was funded by TURI 10 years ago to create a handbook on safer cleaning practices for schools. That handbook was developed during a different viral outbreak, H1N1, and was based on the work of a 5-year collaboration with a national work group. Key elements of the handbook have been updated to reflect new science and technologies and to specifically address the challenges associated with SARS-CoV-2. We hope to have the remainder of the handbook updated in the next several months. In addition to this work, our lab continues to learn about the effectiveness of safer cleaners for industrial and janitorial applications. We're now partnering with public health researchers to develop capabilities for testing the efficacy of safer disinfectants. So it all ties together, and let me just introduce you to our speakers. Ken Wertz has worked in the field of school facilities management for over 20 years. He's been the executive director of the Massachusetts Facilities Administrators Association since 2015 and was recently appointed as a member of the Massachusetts School Building Authority's Designer Selection Panel. Lynn Rose has worked for about 30 years in K-12 schools, developing and implementing environmental health and safety systems for all school departments. She's been recognized for her work through awards from EPA, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, Western MassCosh, and most recently from the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable as the 2019 Educator of the Year. Carol Westinghouse has worked with child care programs, K-12 schools, colleges and universities, and a range of other facilities to improve their indoor air quality. She specializes in assisting facilities that provide services to children in adopting green cleaning and integrated pest management programs throughout the Northeast. Lynn and Carol co-authored the handbook that forms the foundation of much of this webinar. And finally, Dr. Jason Marshall has been a part of the TURI family for almost 25 years and has been the director of the laboratory for almost 15 years. He focuses on testing the performance of safer cleaners for industrial and janitorial applications and has authored several articles, book chapters, and guides on the subject. In the last year, the lab has been working closely with UMass Lowell faculty to develop disinfecting efficacy testing capabilities at our lab. I apologize about the Blue Jay who wants to be heard as well. I want to give you a sense of our webinar structure. Ken will give us an update on the status of schools at this critical point in history. Lynn and Carol will then dive deep into strategies for safely disinfecting schools. After that kind of fire hose of information, we hope to give you all a time to gather in small groups to debrief about what you've heard and to share your stories and tips. Then we'll hear from Jason about the work of TURI's lab. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you, Ken.
Pam, thanks for the sweet introduction. It's great to see so many people logging in here, and it's really interesting to see how many people from not Massachusetts are logging in. I always like getting perspective from other states to see what's going on. I talk to my counterparts out there, other executive directors that run state associations, Michigan, New Jersey, Texas, just to kind of get a feeling of what they're dealing with and how they're going and how they're approaching things. So, but today I'm going to focus on what we're dealing with here in Massachusetts and some of the work that I was lucky enough to sit on a working group for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's task force that put together documents to get us back to school. Pam, could you go to the next slide? So DESE, that's the acronym for the department. Commissioner Jeff Riley and his team have been working tirelessly since this pandemic started, and they have a ton of resource documents up on their desktop. Guidance on facilities and operations for COVID, guidance on transportation, how to disinfect buses, how to protect the drivers, what are we doing there? Guidance on if someone tests positive in a school environment, how do you approach that? And the guidance was designed specifically to be a framework for individual communities to make their own plans. And the reason for that is, much like across the country and different parts of the world, Massachusetts is really diverse, meaning that you have, the city of Boston, which certainly is going to manage this pandemic completely different than a very rural community that maybe has a one-room schoolhouse with 30 students in total. So there wasn't a one-size-fits-all plan. There were a lot of best practices and a lot of really, really intelligent people working on this. That part of the team was the director of pediatrics for Mass General Hospital and is also the president of the Massachusetts Pediatrics Association. So they really took a deep dive into data, into looking and making sure that their recommendations aligned with what the professionals were saying and what the data was showing. And that's why we had so many variations. Cleaning procedures and products. Again, I'm a dot connector. I pull people together. I do have, my experience working as a facilities director. Of course, I've been inundated with a ton of cleaning training, but we're really going to do a deep dive today to talk about the difference between cleaning, the difference between disinfecting and sanitizing, and what those procedures are. There's a lot of confusion right now, and there's a lot of product being used out there on the market that potentially we could substitute for something that's safer for both the person that's applying the product and for the students and teachers that are coming back into our buildings. Water, I'm just going to talk about that briefly. There was concerns of, is the water safe? Are we testing the water? The schools have been closed for 3 or 4 months. Mass Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, who regulates that, sent out guidance on it. And their guidance is very similar to what we had to deal with when we had the lead and copper crisis. It's a flushing protocol, it's procedures, it's making sure you're moving water before people come back. So take that little anxiety tidbit off your list. We have enough in that bucket. You don't need to add that one to it. That one we have good control over. HVAC, I could spend 3 days talking about that. There's a lot of confusion and a lot of information out there and misinformation as to what's going on. The best guidance that I can give to folks right now is make sure your facilities department or whoever is in charge of your buildings is doing a full audit of your HVAC systems. What are their capacity? What can they do? How can you maximize the amount of fresh air coming in? It's interesting that it took a pandemic for people to realize how important HVAC and filtration is. Us facilities geeks, we've known that forever. MERV 13 filters, you're hearing a lot of that going on. MERV is the rating for the amount of filtration that a filter can take out. Not all equipment can handle a MERV 13 filter. If there's too much resistance going over the filter media, so what will happen is you'll inadvertently damage your motor and fry out your motor. So you have to know what your equipment can handle, and you have to make provisions for that. So if your equipment can't bring in enough fresh air, well, you might have to run the heat and open your windows, and that's okay. but you need to have that as part of your plan. And part of your plan needs to be a specific plan per building. We have some schools in Massachusetts that were built in the 50s that have steam radiators and operable windows. Well, that plan for that elementary school is going to be completely different than their brand new high school that was built in 2019 to meet either LEED or Mass Chip standards, which they can use the system to meet all the standards that are being put out there. And those standards right now, there's guidance from ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating and Air Conditioning Engineers. There's links up on massfacilities.com. We have a resource page for COVID that everyone's welcome to go take a look at. If you click on the ASHRAE one, it'll bring you to guidance for schools and universities. And it kind of walks you through a process of a checklist of what you should be looking at. Communication gaps right now, anxiety and differing views are at an all-time high. Everyone's worried. I have 2 kids going back to school that are going to be going to a public high school in my town. And as much as I know about what's going on, I'm sending them to school. But I have a little bit of anxiety. I want to figure out what's going on because I know the kids have anxiety. I know the teachers have anxiety. It's a tricky part, and it's communicating what you're doing in your buildings, how you're making changes to the public, to the teachers, to everyone. Here's what we've done with our HVAC systems. We're flushing out the building 24 hours. We're doing this, we're doing that. Let people know. Don't operate in a silo because that's just going to build continued anxiety. And especially when it comes to your cleaning procedures and protocols, let people know what you're doing, the guidance that you're following. So that way you can help reduce some of that anxiety because this is a crazy time and it's going to take all of us. Next slide, Pam. Everyone needs carbs to help with some of that anxiety. So here's a nice plate of rolls. So I wanted to talk about rolls a little bit. Next slide. So roles, you have multiple people on your team. You have custodians, you have teachers, you have students, you have parents. Everyone is a critical part of that team. Our custodians, we're going to really do a deep dive today and talk about the critical components of that, about what they should be doing, about how they should be doing it. Importantly, of how they're making sure they're staying safe. Teachers, likewise, you need to educate them as to what they're doing because they have a huge burden on their shoulders. They need to submit 3 forms of education to last week to the Department of Education, showing what it will look like for a hybrid model, for a full in-person model, for a remote learning model. So this is all new territory for all of us. The students I put on there because the students are our largest population entering our schools on a daily basis. Is there something they can do to help out? On one of our conference calls, we had a student volunteer that was helping out, representing the students for the state of Massachusetts. And she had really, really great advice. She said, the students will pitch in. We will wipe down desks if you ask us to. But let us know that we're helping. Don't give it to us as a directive. Don't say, you will clean your desk after class. Say, in order to help us combat COVID and keep our schools open and keep all of your friends and teachers safe, we need you to wipe down your desk after class to make sure that you're part of the process. And then the kids will step in. Parents are losing their minds right now. It's a really, really crazy time. And I put parents there because sometimes with the best intentions, people are trying to do things and support the schools. You know what? I'm going to send my kid into school with a tub of disinfectant wipes to help out. That's going to be my part. Teachers, same thing. I'm going to bring in products to make sure I can wipe down the kids' desks. Well, there's a conflict with that. We'll talk about it later on too, that school departments have to have safety data sheets on all the products we're using in our buildings. If people are bringing in things from outside, they might not react too well with some of the products we're using in our building. You know, I'm suspect. So I've got a tub of disinfectant wipes like everyone else in the world has right now. I know my kids use them without gloves. I know on the back of the package it says wear PPE. I get it. It's crazy, crazy times right now. So what we're trying to do is educate people, have everyone be part of the team, so that way we're not making any missteps and making sure that in the interest of battling COVID, we're not inadvertently hurting people on the other end. Next, Pam. So again, thank you everyone for the time and the opportunity to kind of open up this session. I'm really excited for our presenters today. They come to the table with a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of information. So if you do need any support resources, we have them up on our webpage, and I keep updating them daily. There's probably 20 or 30, and they're really targeted towards facilities and operations. So if you're looking for something to do an educational model, that's not the place. If you're looking for someplace how to change a filter, come give us a visit. And now I'll turn it back over to Pam. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ken. That's terrific. So now I'd like to let Lynn Rose share your screen, and off you go.
Can everybody see it? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. And if you could put it into slideshow format, we can see the full.
Yeah.
That's
Hi,
great.
good morning, everybody. I'm going to share the program, the kind of a systems approach that Carol and I have developed over the last 15 years for working with schools. And this is, I'm going to start by talking with a set of infographics that we use. We start with educating people about transmission of the virus as the foundation to then talk about how to break that transmission. So just real briefly, there's 3 key ways that the virus is transmitted, and we will be just addressing one of those today. So there's the indirect contact with the surface. An infected person touches a surface. Somebody else touches that surface and has direct contact with the person. So that's direct contact between people. And then we've been hearing a lot more about the droplets and the airborne transmission of aerosols. So today we're really going to be talking about contact transmission with surfaces. And this infographic, really, we designed this because we have what we call a 3-pronged strategy, that we all have roles and responsibilities when it comes to dealing with the virus. So we have lots of information about personal hygiene and social strategies. And like Ken was saying, there's the facility-based dealing with airborne transmission. And then what we'll be focusing on today is the cleaning for health and targeted disinfection. But we just felt like it was important to frame this, that this is a strategy that we all have different responsibilities within the strategy. So we break it out into 3 levels of germ control on a surface. So again, we're just dealing with surfaces, not airborne transmission. So cleaning just removes germs. Sanitizers and sanitizing only kills bacteria. And then there's disinfecting, which kills all germs tested, including the virus. So we'll be talking about disinfectants today. So we'll start with cleaning, and this is really the foundation, we believe, in infection control. It's your basic using water, detergent, and a cloth, or ideally microfiber, to scrub the surface. And it's essential because it removes the conditions that germs need to survive on a surface. And it can also remove the germs. Germs can hide in dirt. They can attach themselves to dirt. So when you wash the germs away, when you're washing the dirt away, you can wash up to 99 or more than 99% of the germs, depending on how you do it. There's another really exciting thing about cleaning, is that we're learning that you can possibly inactivate the virus by breaking down the outer layer, protective layer, which is made of fat. And Jason's going to talk about this later, but that's exciting. And then we need to prepare the surface for disinfecting. So disinfectants need to be in contact, that's why they call it contact time, with the germ in order to kill them. And so we don't want them hiding in dirt. We want them to be in direct contact with the germ. So I just wanted to reference sanitizing because it only deals with bacteria. We're not going to discuss it today, but I do want to point out that there are some products that are both registered by EPA to be sanitizers and disinfectants. And it's typically, but not always, at different concentrations and contact time. So you have to read the label. If it's registered as a sanitizer and disinfectant, you want to make sure you follow those very specific directions. Finally, disinfection. So disinfectants can only be, they are tested to be used on non-porous surfaces, which is a really smooth, hard surface, like a wall, table, door handle. And so they are tested on those surfaces. And again, you need to clean and rinse the surface if the product requires prior to disinfecting. Okay, so which disinfectants are approved for COVID-19? So EPA has created List N. It is a searchable database on their website. And as Pam said earlier, disinfectants can help protect us from the virus, but we also need to pay attention to that they are actually pesticides designed to kill germs. So they have hazards that we need to be aware of. And so List N that provides us with approved products has products that some of them are very hazardous and some of them are safer. So I am going to turn this over now to Carol Westinghouse. She's president of Informed Green Solutions, and she's going to talk about the hazards of products and some safer products.
Good morning. And I don't seem to be able to get my thumbnail up, so you'll just have to bear with me. As Lynn said, some products available for disinfecting against SARS-CoV-2 are not recommended for use in schools because of health issues. Studies tell us that work-related use of bleach for disinfecting purposes can cause new onset asthma or trigger asthma episodes. Some studies have actually found that children born to mothers who occupationally used bleach while pregnant can have a greater risk of developing asthma. Next slide. As demonstrated by the illustration, the dose a child receives breathing the same air as an adult puts children at a greater risk of injury. Bleach solutions have to be mixed daily, exposing the person mixing the bleach to the much higher concentrated form of the product. And there is the danger of accidentally mixing bleach with another product, such as one containing ammonia or acids, and creating a toxic gas. And I'm sure all of the presenters here have had to deal with that issue. There is the form of accidentally mixing bleach, and the bleach is also corrosive to the eyes and skin. Every year, thousands of cases of bleach poisonings are reported to the U.S. Poison Control Centers. So far this year, there are more cases than in past years at this time. This demonstrates the hazards of using bleach and not using it correctly, but all disinfectants should be used with proper procedures and the recommended personal protective equipment. Next slide. Quaternary ammonium compounds, otherwise known as quats, should also be avoided. Quats are listed under different names and are the active ingredients in many disinfecting products. Studies tell us that they are associated with asthma, skin and respiratory irritation, and reproductive issues. The overuse of bleach and quats can contribute to the development of superbugs. Next slide. So how do we know what products are safe to use? That's what everybody wants to know. Independent third-party certifiers have developed standards that products must meet in order to be certified as safer. The Environmental Protection Agency's Design for the Environment program works with manufacturers to assist them in making their products safer for users. They also review active ingredients used in disinfectants and approve those that meet their standards. Their website lists products they have reviewed and determined safer. And Jason will talk about the Design for the Environment program in more detail during his presentation. Green Seal is another third-party certifier. They develop standards and certify cleaning and disinfecting products that meet those standards, and these are available on their website. We look to these independent organizations for information on safer products. Next slide. Safety data sheets and labels are another way to determine the safety of products. Safety data sheets are documents that summarize health and safety as well as other information on individual products. Schools are required to have safety data sheets for products they use and should be able to provide them to parents and staff. A safety data sheet lists a signal word that indicates the level of toxicity of the product, and you can see the signal words on the screen. Danger means a product is either poisonous or highly toxic. Warning that it is moderately toxic, and caution that it is slightly toxic. This allows us to see at a glance how hazardous the product is. Look for a signal word of caution on disinfectants. Safety data sheets are also available on the manufacturer's website or by typing in the product name followed by the initials SDS. School staff should be trained on the use of products and how to read an SDS. Labels, another source of information, are required to have the signal word displayed. Some safety data sheets and labels contain the Hazardous Materials Identification System or National Fire Protection Association ratings, and examples are shown here. As you can see, they rate products for different criteria. Look for all zeros on these scales, or at least for the health rating. Next slide. This table, titled Selection of Products on the TURI website, is part of our infection control handbook. We looked at the active ingredients on list N disinfectants that are effective against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. We then summarized indicators such as DFE approval, EPA's toxicity ratings, and other criteria that would influence the safety of those ingredients and the products containing them. Some manufacturers advertise their products based on the EPA's toxicity rating. You can find this information on disinfectant product sheets or online by typing in the name of the product and EPA's toxicity category. 4 is the safest category. Next slide. Other organizations such as TURI review products from a science-based perspective and determine which meet their criteria as safer. We use these lists to identify products that we know schools and childcare programs are using and have developed an infographic listing them that is available on the TURI website. And I want to say there are also other organizations, Environmental Working Group, Women's Voices for the Earth, Eco Logo, that all have lists and information on safer products. So I'll turn this over to Lynn.
Lynn, you're on mute. Lynn, you're on mute.
Okay.
There you go. Oops.
List N for emerging pathogens. It's a great list, and they've really developed lots of ways that you can find what you're looking for. You can search by some of the safer ingredients. You can search by if you only want a few minutes for contact time. Or of particular interest is, you know, with these new Mr. Foggers and electrostatic, you can search. It's a little more challenging to find the application method, but you're required on a product label as to how you can use the product. So you do want to check how the product can be applied. This is something that's currently under review by EPA. And we do have a fact sheet that I wrote on the TURI website about how to use this list. I'm going to talk just real briefly about how to use it, because there's some confusion about whether or not you can find what you're looking for. So because the list only contains the primary formulation that is registered by the manufacturer, the thing is that many companies use that same formulation and they give their products different names, and it's actually the same exact product with different names. So the way to find it is to search by the EPA registration number, and that number can be found either on the label, but if you don't have the label, I have found you've been able to put in the product name and the words EPA registration number, and you should be able to find it. You can also check with distributors. So you use this EPA registration number, and you would look at just these two sets of numbers right here, because this is the formulation number. This here might be the manufacturer, but this here, if you find an identical first two set of numbers, it's the same product, and it's approved for COVID-19. So once you find that product, so here's a product named Chlorcept, and actually these are the hypochlorous tabs, and it comes under at least 5 or 6 different names. So you would look for what I call the surrogate germs. So here is a surrogate germ. In this case, it's hepatitis A. This is a screenshot from the EPA list N. So you would find hepatitis A on your label to look for the concentration and contact time. So it will give you your instructions for how to use the disinfectant that you have for COVID-19. So for actually purchasing, now that you know what products you may want to purchase, part of what we're running into is that the supply chain, in some cases for some products, is backed up for months and months at a time. And so by going out to bid, that delays getting on some of these back order lists that the different vendors have. So working with the cooperative contracts, so there's the Operational Services Division Combis, FAC 85 contract for cleaning and disinfecting supplies and equipment. And then there's the Mass Higher Edge Collaborative contract. And what's really valuable about these is that you can go right, they've already gone out to bid, they vetted these for health and safety, for efficacy. So you can either direct request quotes, or depending on what your school system requires, you could get written quotes, but they have already done the work, and you can turn around a quote a lot quicker. The other thing that's really helpful, I found with these contracts, is they have contract managers. If you have a problem with the vendor, if you're not getting what you need, or whatever the issue is with the product, you can contact the contract manager and get some support. The other thing is that these contracts have buying power that single school districts do not have by themselves. And they have bargained for free training and technical assistance. So it's really worth taking a look at what ancillary services you can get under these contracts. So when you're working with vendors, what I'm finding is some of these products that they are selling, they are not so familiar with. They're selling products and equipment they have not sold before, or maybe they're using, what I'm finding is they're using certain products and equipment that they never used before. And so based on the experiences we've had, we've generated a list here of the type of questions that will help you figure out what you need to know about the product in terms of health and safety. Can it be used in certain equipment? So this is really important to go through. And what I found is I've really pushed my vendors, if they cannot answer the question, for them to contact the manufacturer, talk to their chemist, and you should be able to push them to get the information you need. Just real briefly, this little graphic here on the right, it just to demonstrate that here's these hydrochlorous tabs. It's the same product with the same EPA registration number. Actually, there's 2 registration numbers. It's the same product, but one's created in Ireland and one's US based. And the thing to note, and this is what I find vendors, and they're not always very upfront about this kind of information, is, you know, you can take the same product, it's different concentration, it takes a different amount for your dilution rate, and it has different contact times. So here is the same exact product with lots of different guidance, and you really want to nail down, work with your vendor to figure this out. So now that we know what products we're going to use, the kind of training that needs to be provided, you know, the custodians, and if you're having any staff do any of this cleaning and disinfectant, they need to be trained on safe work practices. They need to understand infection control, which is why we provided some of the infographics that we did. How do you prevent transmission once you understand how the virus is transmitted? And then under OSHA hazard communication, as Carol said previously, we need to provide training on the safety data sheet for any new products that are brought into the system. So you need to provide, this is a systems approach, so you need to provide the supplies that staff need. And we've developed a fact sheet, which I'll show you in a minute. You need to provide them the safety data sheet and written work practices. And there's personal protective equipment for both chemicals and the virus protection. And DESE has provided schools across the state of Massachusetts with a purchasing system that you can contact them to participate in. So here's a copy of the fact sheet. I'm just taking one example of one department. What I find working in school districts is that every single department has different issues they need to address, maybe different areas to disinfect and items, product and equipment criteria, depending on who, what, if you have kids versus older kids, if you have young kids versus older kids. And then when you're developing procedures, what do you need to take into account? So this is a fact sheet that's on the TURI website that will help you walk through every single department. You can add your own criteria as well. So microfiber is one of the supplies that we recommend using because it's really one of the most effective cloths used for infection control. We have a fact sheet it's actually in the document in the handbook that goes over this in more detail. But the one key thing I want to say is that the major make or break operations issue here is getting the microfiber laundered. And I just wanted to let folks know, and you can wash it on site. The other option is to use laundering services that have their own supply of microfiber. And laundering services for microfiber is available on the statewide contract FAC 85. So which surfaces and items to disinfect? CDC has come up with a great decision-making tool about whether or not you need to clean and disinfect. So this walks you through the surfaces, where they're located, how long it's been. So we have included a link here to this infographic. So one of the really big concerns is what happens if somebody's been sick in a space, and we can't go into the level of detail that's here, but we have provided a link to both the CDC's guidance and also the Massachusetts guidance. It's very detailed. Some of the key issues or the key operations is to wait 24 hours, is to air out the space, clean and then disinfect, but there's also guidance on vacuuming and other protocols. Some of the high risk areas we need to look at is the nurse's office, and what the districts have had to do is really think about where they're going to expand nurses' offices for isolation rooms and how they're going to accommodate people sick with the virus. And so don't just think about the nurse's office itself. You need to take into consideration any spaces that are also used for this purpose. Special education, the students may be on the floor. There's a lot of food contact surfaces, the occupational therapy equipment, and preschool, again, children on the floor, food contact surfaces. So just a note about floors, there's vendors out there selling products to disinfect floor, or to not just disinfect floors, but put antimicrobial finishes on floors. And unless there's a blood spill or there's some other skin contact with the surface, all you really need to do is wash your floors, maybe with more frequency. And if you have microfiber, again, that's the best for infection control. And with that, you can use an all-purpose third-party certified green product. So this handbook that we put together complements the other worksheet about by department, looking at what we call common high touch points, touched by many people during the day, versus your cell phone, which is just you, or your computer. So these are points that are touched by many people throughout the day. So what we did was we broke it out by department and listed out the typical common high touch points, and these are made to be customizable. You can copy them up, distribute them to your different departments. People can customize them. They can post them when they've been completed. So they're just a tool for you to use. So now moving into work practices, We have our supplies, we have our training. So now how do we disinfect? We really want to make sure that people understand the hazards of whatever products they're working with. And Carol talked about reading the label and the safety data sheet. A really big thing, we talked about this earlier about not bringing in unauthorized products. That's huge. We cannot manage them. And lastly, to wear the personal protective equipment. And you really want to promote when people are dispensing products, because often they're dispensing concentrates, and that's where you're going to run into like some of the highest exposure hazards. So preparing to disinfect, you want to make sure that you disinfect it when as few as people as possible. And this is going to be a real challenge given that we're trying to disinfect more frequently. Ventilate as much as you possibly can while you're using the disinfectant. Again, wear your PPE. You got to follow the dilution rates exactly, because products are tested based on a certain concentration to kill specific germs. And that information is on the label. The other thing is never mix chemicals, like Carol said earlier. That's where you have some really hazardous exposures, and more than that, can have some incidences. We want to pre-clean and rinse the surface. One thing to note is we talked earlier, Carol talked earlier about bleach having to be redone every day. So just in general, diluted products have a shorter shelf life, and even concentrates have a shelf life, so you need to look on them. The hand sanitizer has a shelf life. And anything that you discard, you need to make sure you do it properly. Diluted products are one thing, concentrates are most likely considered hazardous waste. So now we're actually into the work practice itself. Whenever possible, if you can spray onto the cloth and keep it out of the air is the best, unless it says otherwise on the label. We talked about follow the directions for contact time, the amount of time it has to stay wet on the surface, which is different for every product. If required on the label, you want to rinse high touch surfaces. We've had problems with kids sitting on toilet seats with disinfectants, getting their bums burned. And lastly, wash hands after removing gloves. Disinfectant wipes, we're going to make a point here because we found that this is the most misunderstood, misused product of all. And that is because there are so many types: disinfecting, sanitizing, cleaning, hand wipes. So we have this infographic that I won't go through right now, but is on the website, and it directs the schools to actually how to use the product, what not to use it on. And one thing that's really important is that students cannot use it by law. These are considered antimicrobial pesticides. So they're pesticides to kill germs, and only adults can use disinfecting wipes. And my recommendation to schools is either prohibit their use, or if you're going to allow their use, decide what product you're using and either provide it or provide the name of it, and otherwise prohibit any other products from being brought into the school in terms of wipes. So when you're disinfecting, you can actually transfer germs from one surface to the other. So here are just a few of the strategies that you can do to minimize transferring the germs. So there's what we call the 8-fold method. That's one way of having a new surface on the cloth for every new surface that you use. Some people use color-coded systems for different rooms, one for bathrooms, one for kitchens. Another key thing is to allow the cloths to dry before you reuse them to prevent any supporting the germs in the microfiber itself. And don't forget to wash hands and clean shared equipment after disinfecting. So here's a huge concern that we have, and Ken's actually spoke to this quite a bit, is we are bringing pallets and pallets and pallets of all kinds of new cleaning products and disinfectants into the school. And I've taken most common ingredients and broke it down into what we call hazard categories. And if products need to be stored in these hazard categories, whether they're cleaners or disinfectants. And the reason is, if you store any of these, like bleach is an oxidizer, And a quat is a base. And if you store them next to each other, you could have a hazardous reaction, which is what we want to prevent. And I've just provided a real brief. I've provided an example of the kind of infographic I give my schools. Here's how what you can store together on what shelves to prevent compatibility. So whatever products you're bringing into your school, you have to take into account where you're going to store it, how you're going to store it, and what you have that you're storing it with. So lastly, I want to talk about electronics, and here's another thing we're developing a fact sheet on. What we're seeing coming into some of the IT departments, these Chromebooks are coming back with bed bugs, cockroaches, and other pests. And they also need to be cleaned and disinfected for germs. That is, if they can't be isolated for a number of days. So a couple of considerations, and we'll have more detail in the fact sheet when it's finished, but not all pests can be treated the same. Cockroaches will die in a week, but bed bugs can live a year without food or water. There are chemical and non-chemical solutions to kill pests. Some are safer than others. And then any chemical that you're using on a laptop has to, you don't want it to damage the laptop, and you don't want it to cause exposure to staff doing these work practices. So what we've done is we've provided a list of some of the key manufacturers and their links to their websites for how to deal with all the different components. And some of what we found is that some of these components, one product you use on the keyboard might damage the finish on the outside. So you really should consult those websites. One of the easiest things to do in actually trying to disinfect the electronics is if you can use a keyboard cover. It's much easier to pull off and clean rather than having to worry about putting chemicals right on the equipment. Again, make sure it's an EPA list and approved product. And then lastly, the default product that's being recommended for use on electronics is alcohol. One is a class 3 flammable, so there's some storage issues. The other is it's tricky because alcohol evaporates really quickly. So there's a balance between trying to put the product on long enough to keep it wet for the contact time, but not so wet to damage the electronics. So that wraps up my portion of the training and the webinar, and I'm turning it back over to
Pam.
Yeah, Pam, but I'm just wondering, should I keep this up or
yes, please, just leave that up for a minute.
Sure.
And yeah. So lots and lots of information here. And yes, everything that's being presented, the slides as well as the recording of this webinar are going to be available on our website. I've included a link to that a couple of times in the chat. There's also some other resources that have been shared in the chat, which is really great. Thank you. What I wanted to do was to give everybody a chance to have a conversation together. And what we'll do is we'll open up breakout rooms and give you about 10 minutes to just talk about what you've been hearing and what are some of the biggest challenges that you or your facility or your school are facing. It's important to give everybody some space to have it to talk. So we're going to keep the groups small. I'll give you not a 60-second warning, actually, I'll give you a 30-second warning when the breakout discussions will stop. While you're chatting, if you could select somebody in your group to just be prepared to report back to the larger group on one key point that came out of your discussion, that would be great. You will have a chance to hear from a couple of groups, certainly not all of the groups. The other thing that we can do is if you could share in the chat one of the key points that came out of your discussion, that will be really helpful. So I'm going to try to open up the breakout rooms now, and I'm going to do it automatically. And we are going to have about 17 groups. Breakout groups. So I'm going to open that up. Remember, what I'd like for you to do is to just talk about what some of the biggest challenges your school or facility are facing, and please do share tips. and leave some space for everybody to get a chance to speak. Okay. Is that working? So people are starting to get into their various breakout rooms. I am going to assign people to rooms if they're not already in one. Great. Hi, it looks like we have some people who have not gotten into breakout rooms yet. If you want, we can just have a conversation in this small group. So you can feel free to unmute yourself and say hi. If you have been invited to join a breakout group, please click join. Hi, it looks like we have several people who have not gotten into a breakout group. If you can see on your Zoom panel a request to join the breakout room, please click join. And if you would like to unmute yourself and chat here in the main meeting, that would be fine as well. Hello?
Pam, I left my breakout room. I had 4 people, and one of them was Liz.
Okay, thanks. So there are, how about I assign you to a different breakout group? Do you mind? See if I can find you.
Or just wait at this point.
Yeah, maybe. Jason, if you want to try to, see if there's several people who, well, there's several people who are kind of in the main group right now, and maybe we can get some conversation happening here. I'm going to try to join another.
What you should do is randomly just say, ask unmute. I've had them say something. Put them on the spot.
I can do that. Of course, now I just did something funny with my Zoom screen.
I'll say hi to Diane from Fay School. That's where Sanderson will be going in the fall.
Okay. So does anybody who is not in a breakout group, who is still part of this main group, want to just share what some of the challenges that you're facing might be? You have to unmute yourselves.
Or not. how many people in the room are actually going to be going back in person in the fall to start?
Jason, is that something happening in the background there? So we have several people in the main room here. Peter Lawson, Michelle Santos, Martin Williams, Victoria Leonard, Chris Conway, Catherine, Mike Kompanic, Diane Byrne, Jim Rikosh. Just the names that I could quickly identify. If you'd be interested in just unmuting yourself and talking about what some of the challenges that you've been facing at your facilities with respect to safer cleaning and disinfecting, that would be great.
So Pam, the noise on my side with the students cleaning in the lab, so they're having too much fun. I had to stop that.
You really need to do something about that. I'm gonna pause. Please just said that too. Okay, I'm recording. I'm recording again. So we should be getting people returning back from their breakout sessions. They've got 6 seconds and then everybody will pop back here automatically. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing one thing that you learned from your discussion. Again, what I'd like to do is to invite one person from each group to raise your hand. Obviously, we don't have enough time for every group to share what they've talked about, but it would be great to hear from a couple of groups. So if you hover over your own picture, you should be able to raise your hand, or you have to go to the participant thing to do that. Let's see. So Dorothy Wigmore, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, and if you could just share one thing that your group talked about.
Aside from the sort of the hidden costs, we talked about the cleaning and disinfecting that needs to get done between classes, and who's going to do it, and how, and sort of with what, those kinds of things. If students are changing classes in particular, that's going to be a big issue.
Right, and did anybody have any tips or ideas on how to manage that in your group?
Didn't get that far.
Okay.
Questions?
Yeah, fair enough. Carol, do you want to share what your group talked about?
Came up as, does water quality affect disinfectant efficacy? And that might be a Jason question. We didn't have the answers. The second question was, is using disinfectant equipment a violation of FIFRA, the electrostatic, and Mr. Foggers? Does that violate FIFRA if they are not particularly designed for that use? The third one was that this is actually a statement, no disinfectants have been approved for long-term efficacy. And the fourth issue was buildings that were unhealthy before COVID, that don't have ventilation, et cetera, and how can we get funding to help make them into more healthier buildings? Which is not a question any of us can answer.
Right, so you had an awful lot going on there. Thank you.
I can answer the funding one.
Great.
Okay, good.
There's COVID money. So for some of these buildings, if you can tag it as a COVID response item, there is federal and state money available and funds available for you to upgrade your heating and ventilation systems, do different things, different projects, whether it's installing UVC lighting in your ductwork, or maybe you're gonna look at bipolar ionization. There's all sorts of cool stuff and technology out there. One district actually just bought a portable UVC light tripod unit. They're about $7,000, and they're using it to disinfect a space if someone tests positive for COVID. You go into the room, everyone's empty out of it, you plug it in for 30 minutes, it kills everything in the space, and you have one for the entire district. So there are funds available through COVID response. So work with your facilities department, your business manager, and see if you can tap into those.
As for the other questions, stay tuned. It's coming up.
Right, Jason's going to cover some of this. So do we have one other group that would like to share a little bit about what they talked about? You can raise your hand. Nope. Why don't we go ahead and then, oops, there we go. C. Rays, why don't you go ahead and share? I don't know what your full name is, sorry.
Hi, it's Chris Reyes. Sorry about that. So our group, we discussed some of the challenges that we would find in a school system setting. What were some of the questions that were being posed to us as far as going back? As far as one of the things that we discussed was the manpower, the ability to clean effectively, what that's going to look like, the ability to actually tap into using students and teachers, and how much pushback we may be getting from the students and teachers, because they, as far as what their unions might allow. We discussed if there was any pushback or what any concerns the unions may have had, the custodial unions. And one of the other things we discussed was the products. One of the gentlemen in our group was actually in Puerto Rico, and he was discussing with us some of the concerns because they're an island and people are just trying to sell product, and some of the concerns with, you know, bringing in the different products and the ability to maintain those effectively.
Yeah, Ken, you might have a response to some of that.
Sorry, I was tracking down a Tools for Schools link for one of the people in our group. Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry. I got sidetracked. Chris.
That's all right. So real briefly, we discussed issues with, one of the questions came up as far as manpower was, how can we, you know, what is the ability to get students and teachers to actually help? Because one of the questions that I've been posed with in Ipswich was, there's a pushback potentially from the unions as is it in their contracts? If we're asking students to help, they're touching the same bottle, and now are we effectively passing COVID to them?
Right. Okay, yep, okay. Now I'm picking up the pieces that I dropped in my head. So I think it's unrealistic to ask teachers to do anything additional at this point in time. Some teachers, as everyone knows, will step up and do it anyway. We don't even need to ask them. They're the ones that are always stepping up to help out, to tie the shoes, to wipe down the desks, and do all that stuff. But if we put another burden on them right now, they're overwhelmed. So I think having teachers part of the cleaning solution doesn't work that well, knowing their bandwidth. Having students use it, if they're part of the process. I mean, even some of the towns that I've heard that you wouldn't expect, some fairly affluent communities here in the Commonwealth, that's part of their response. They're letting parents know, hey, we're going to give your kids some neutral cleaner, wipe down your desk. And just a reminder to people, so our elementary school kids, our primary school kids, and to some point, depending on your educational model, your middle school, if they're team-based, we don't care about their desks. And that sounds a little bit callous, but same kid, same desk all day, right? So the custodians will go in, clean, disinfect that desk. It'll be ready for school the next morning. The kids can wipe down their desk during the day with a neutral cleaner, even if it's a paper towel with water, just do something during the day. And then we're going to clean and disinfect it again that evening. That's not our problem. Our problem is more of our high school students, because their schedule requires them to move from space to space. And people that aren't educators or aren't in the industry don't realize the complexities of a high school schedule. They're like, oh, just move the teacher. It's like, well, you can't move the teacher because one kid's taking, pre-calculus, one kid's taking AP physics, one kid's taking art, one kid's taking German, one's taking, ASL, American Sign Language. You can't move the teacher. You have to move the kids. So at that age bracket, and looking at some of the data and some of the discussions we're having, are high school age kids kids, or are they young adults? And if you give a young adult a disinfectant that doesn't require PPE, that's a level 4 on the EPA's N list, can the high school kids wipe down, disinfect their desks before they change classes and come up with a plan to have them be part of the solution? And I know not every child and every student can do that, nor would every family be comfortable with that. But there has to be some workaround that, whether it's, you know, the kids get up 2 minutes early, walk away, and one student goes and sprays the desk. There has to be some solution that we can, and then after they're done spraying the desk, you wipe it down with disinfectant to make sure that the bottle is clean and disinfected for the next person. There has to be some workaround, because physically there's not enough labor and resources from our custodians to do everything that we're looking at. And I talked about it yesterday in another presentation, that you really need to evaluate your workloading in your building and figure out what has to give. You know, your normal day-to-day practices pre-COVID may have been that you spot mop every classroom every day. Well, that's a nice to have. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, we need to spot mop every classroom once a week because we're spending more time hitting all these high touch points. Does that help? I don't want to consume too much time because I could talk all day.
I think the bottom line is this is a very complex situation. And so, you know, there's a lot of good discussion points that people are sharing in the chat as well. And I think, let's see, do we have one more raised hand that we can cover? No, we're good. So what I want to do is move on, because I think Jason Marshall might be able to cover some of the questions that have been coming up and some of the discussions that have been coming up. And we will have time for Q&A at the end of this. So why don't we, Jason, why don't you go ahead and share your screen, and we'll continue on. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's get rolling here. So we have time, so there's questions at the end. Hopefully I can answer some of the ones that you guys have all started to throw out there. I know there was a couple that come up that I have information on. Hopefully it's enough to satisfy your information. Is it? There we go. All right, so I'm going to talk about some information about the safer disinfectant chemicals, as well as some of the processes that are out there. You've seen the list from EPA's active ingredients from their Safer Choice Design for an Environment programs. I don't know, read through them all, but these are all ones that have been deemed to be safer, either by themselves or in mixtures. But there's also other chemicals that are out there that you can look into that may not fall on their list for one reason or another. And these would include steam cleaning or steam disinfection, hypochlorous acid, either from electrolyzed water or the NADCC tablets that Lynn had mentioned earlier. I think Ken had just mentioned the UVC lighting. And there's also some questions in the pop-up about all-purpose cleaners and how those might be able to be used to help disrupt the cells from the viruses. I'm throwing it out there now, and I'll throw it out when I come up again later, that it hasn't really been validated. It's theoretically possible that it should work, but we're hoping to get some information to show that it does work. So the EPA Design for the Environment for disinfecting chemicals, they go through a series of evaluations. They look at not just the active ingredients, they also look at everything else that's in the product. The active ingredients for the disinfectant are what's covered by the DFE evaluation. All of the other ingredients that are used in the cleaning or the formulation falls under the Safer Choice endpoints. And I put a link on there to find out about Design for the Environment. And there's also links for the Safer Choice program as well. So to be an EPA authorized antimicrobial pesticide, these are some of the things you've heard a little bit about. They're least hazardous class with their short-term acute toxicity ranking system that goes from 1 to 4, 1 being don't ever use because it's going to kill everything in sight, and 4 is not deemed to be of concern for health and safety. So the 3s and 4s are where they'd like these products to be for acute toxicity. And again, for the more chronic endpoints, you're talking about the carcinogens, endocrine disruption, developmental and reproductive issues. They also want to make sure that they've reviewed and accepted the mixtures, like I said, all ingredients. not just the active ingredients. There are some that may be safe by themselves, but you put them together with something else. And we've all heard about don't mix chemicals. Well, sometimes you can't mix certain things that go into different products. You get a nasty side effect, byproduct. They also want to make sure that these products don't need PPE, right? So that way you're not worrying about the gloves and masks and things like that. So there's not going to be any harm on your skin or in your eyes. They also want to make sure that there aren't any unforeseeable reasons why they don't work. What is, if there's a unique situation, if you use it and if it's not working, you know, they want to make sure they can avoid that for being a product on their list. They also want to make sure that there are no unresolved compliance or enforcement actions associated with it. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a second. There are, as Lynn had mentioned, just because your product may not show up on there, it can be the same as one of the identified DEFE products that are on the list by EPA, just under a different name from a different formulator or a different manufacturer, but they're using the same active ingredients at the same concentrations. So a lot of times they'll license those out to other people. So some of the other options that we talked about is steam. This is not, I say dry steam, but it's not really without moisture, but it's just the water quality, water content is much lower than normal steam, like an iron or something like that. This has very low moisture, has high temperature, and allows for quick disinfecting of a lot of organisms. It's also very effective at cleaning things as well. A lot of vendors have done testing that it is very effective on harder to kill viruses than the SARS-CoV-2, such as the canine paravirus and the surrogate for corona, the coronavirus 229E. So if they've been shown to work on these harder to kill organisms, it's expected to be effective according to what EPA has put out about their requirements, what they're looking for. Now, steam isn't necessarily on their list because it's more of, they consider it more of a device and less of a chemistry, because it's not the water that's doing the disinfection, it's actually the temperature. The water is just the delivery of the temperature to the organism. Another option, there was a question earlier about what's TURI's thoughts on hypochlorous acid. The EPA has some restrictions on when it can and can't be used. It is, I like to call it the trilogy of the chlorine-based disinfectants. You have chlorine gas, you have hypochlorous, and you have hypochlorite ion. The hypochlorite ion comes from your active ingredient and bleach. Now, depending on the pH, it will basically show you where you fall on the spectrum of the graph. Hopefully you can see my cursor. So in this area here between 3 and 7, you can see most of what you're getting is the hypochlorous acid. And it's actually much more effective than the sodium hypochlorite, which you get out here at pH 9 and 10 for bleach, due to the nature of the size of the molecule and the charge, or lack of a charge on the molecule. And it's very aggressive at killing a wide range of bacteria and viruses. So the trick is for hypochlorous, there's several ways you can get there. It's not something that's easily stored for long periods of time. So a lot of these things are on the site, on demand. You make it when you need it, especially when you talk about the electrolyzed water systems. And there's also the tablets that Lynn had talked about where you drop them in when you need them. But you want to make sure that the products you're using with hypochlorous have a way to maintain that pH in the sweet zone. When you see all you really have is hypochlorous, it's like between 4.5 and 6 is where you'd like to be. Otherwise, you're going to have a mixture of them, and hypochlorous isn't as hazardous to your health and your skin and your eyes as some of the other two of the trilogy. So it's nice to be able to maintain that pH range. Electrolyzed water has come a long way, much like the green cleaning movement of the late 80s or so. We want to go green. What happened? People made these products and said they're great, they're green, but none of them really worked. So the same kind of mentality about, well, electrolyzed water systems, they came out and you have to have these 2 streams and doesn't necessarily work for what I'm looking for. It's an evolving process, and they've improved their systems down to where they get down to 1 single stream. Now, to more recently, you have these handheld devices that you can generate when you need them, and they're good for a couple days. And it's just keep track of what systems you're looking at. If you're buying something that's older, it may not necessarily be as robust as you need it to be, or where it should be for the pH range and monitoring those types of things. The NADC tablets, they're a way to deliver or create hypochlorous. In the tablets, you can use multiple tablets to create a stronger concentration of the active ingredient, hypochlorous acid. And then the hypochlorous acid in there is the same hypochlorous acid that you'd be using if you generate it from electrolyzed water. The chemistry is the same, it's just how you get there is a different way. The benefit with the NADC tablets is that you can actually store them as a tablet until you need them, and that will last longer than buying a bottle of bleach. So remember when I said there was a preferred things that EPA looks for in their DFE list? And there was one of the things, unresolved compliance or enforcement actions associated with the chemical. Well, from what my research, I actually did some talking with some people who do Green Seal certification, EPA Safer Choice designations. I had a nice conversation about why EPA does not have hypochlorous acid on their list. And it's because if you're using any of the 3 chlorinated, chlorine-based disinfectants, chlorine gas, hypochlorous or hypochlorite, and you're using it to treat drinking water, what can happen is with the organic materials that's in the water, there's a potential to form some nasty byproducts. And in this case, the main ones are the trihalomethanes, which are potentially cancer causing. The thing with this is that the rate of formation of these THMs is slow on the order of days for this to actually happen. So if you're using an electrolyzed water system in the home, your water has already gone through this initial treatment to remove the organic material from the water. So by the time you get to your countertop and you're making this, the chances of you forming these THMs is very low. I'm not going to say it's not possible, but it's not on the level of something to be concerned with. So EPA's mindset is there is this issue that's out there around this active chemical, therefore they didn't want to put it on their list. That's not to say that other organizations such as Green Seal, they've gone through and they've evaluated the chemistry, more of how you're going to use it versus any way that you possibly could use it somewhere else. Hopefully that answered the questions about the water quality. And so I'll move on to the UV lights. Ultraviolet light has been used for a long time to be able to remove pathogens from different surfaces, either through water or things like that. The question is, does it work on the SARS-CoV-2? Is it the right kind of light that you're looking at? Is it the right dosage? It's not as easy as some people would like to make it seem, because there's a lot of restrictions you have to make sure. Ken had mentioned the tripod UVC light. You have to make sure that there's nobody else in the room, because there can be exposure that you have to be concerned with. So it takes a lot of effort to make sure it's done the right way by trained people. A lot of these UV lights devices that you find on Amazon and things like that aren't necessarily a safe bet to go with. It's one of the things that we'll be looking at is which ones work and which ones don't work. The wavelength that you're really looking for the UVC is the smaller the wavelength you get more energy out of it. So usually around the 250 nanometers, it's been found to be successful in H1N1, as well as some of the other viruses such as SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV. So it's been shown to disrupt the RNA and the DNA of these organisms. How many people are liking this science lesson so far? And basically what happens then is the organism cannot replicate, and therefore it becomes inactive and basically is killed off. So that's the theory behind where you want. So you're looking for a UVC light to be able to do the disinfection that you're doing. And a lot of the home ones don't necessarily tell you what's in there, and it's more of the broad spectrum UV light that may be involved with it, which can cause issues to eyes and skin. So now we come back around to the all-purpose cleaners / degreasers. And I want to emphasize the degreaser side of it because a grease is a fat, and we talked about earlier that there's a lipid layer, which is a fatty layer that is around the outside of this virus. If you are able to break down that layer, that virus will then fall apart and be no longer a viable organism to be able to infect anybody else. This is something that we're looking into, but we haven't gotten that far yet. And I haven't found a lot of research on people showing that yes, this type of aqueous-based degreaser will work on the viruses. Theoretically speaking, it should work. It'd be great if it does, because like I said, that's a game changer. If you don't have to buy the disinfectants, you can use a Green Seal certified neutral degreaser to do the same job, that would be ideal for most people, or just about everybody. So the other thing we're looking into is we talked about ways of how you apply these disinfectants to a surface. So the traditional ways, you know, you wipe them on, you submerge your rag into the solution, or you spray the surface with a bottle, or you spray the rag with a bottle. So that's the basic way of how things will go through and be applied to the surface. There has been a lot of questions and concerns around electrostatic sprayers and the foggers and misters. And it's important because there was a question about, does this violate any of the EPA rules, the FIFRA rules and things like that? And the answer is yes, it can. If these products have not submitted to change their labels and shown documentation that these products will work using this type of delivery system. I want to go back and make sure that, as you will hear me say often and many times, this does not change how you still need to proceed. You have to follow the directions. And if anybody knows me and has heard me speak before, clean first, clean second, and then move on to disinfecting. So you got to clean, you have to make sure you're using the right concentration, and make sure you're in contact with the organisms, the surfaces, they remain wet for the right amount of time. Why? Is because when this information was submitted to EPA, this is how they did it to show that it does work. If you're not following these instructions, you're not doing what the product is designed to be, and you're giving yourself a false sense of security by saying, yeah, I put it on there, sprayed it on there, I wiped it right off, we're good to go. And that's not going to do it for most products that are out there. And the other reason why EPA wants people to go through with the information about testing is that these products, they can change on how they're delivered. If they're put through the electrostatic system, you know, what does the charge do to the surface? Is the concentration there? Is it going to be wet enough on the surface? Same thing with like the foggers or the misters. Am I getting enough there? Is it lingering in the air? So for the electrostatic sprayers, what they do is they generate a positive, or most of them generate a positive charged particle. You say, great, so all right, it's positive, I'm very happy for it. Well, most surfaces are either neutral or negative, and you all know from more science here, positives and negatives come together, what happens? They like to stick together, right? So they land on the surface, they're actually pulled to the surface quicker because of the charges. When they land on the surface, it has another effect that if you have two positives near each other, what happens to those? They repel each other. So it allows you to get a more uniform coating on a surface because the spray you put on there isn't basically agglomerating into one area. And another positive thing, I use the positive charge particles, is that as you can see in the picture in the top corner, usually when you spray something from a manual trigger, you're looking at the target you're trying to hit. It's called line of sight. The nice thing about the electrostatic sprayers is that it allows you to get some coverage on the sides that you can't see due to the nature of it circling around behind it and being pulled back into the opposite side. So it gives you better coverage in a shorter amount of time. It gives you more uniform coverage as opposed to the traditional spray wipes that are prone to many human error, meaning, did I spray that area? Did I spray enough there? Did I pay attention where I left off? Did I do enough here and there? So it helps to eliminate a lot of that human error that can develop. So moving on to the foggers and the other misters, they deliver small particles like the electrolyzed water systems do, but they don't have a charge on it. It's relying on gravity to pull this to the surface. And as I mentioned, this also depends on line of sight. So if you can't see it, neither can the spray. And so you have a limited amount of application to it. This also can change how you interact with that room that you're using these foggers or misters on, because if you're putting them into a small enough spray, the particle size, you're going to get a fog, a cloud that stays there, and it takes time for it to settle down. You'll have to wait and make sure that that is all down on onto the surfaces. Otherwise, you're walking into and getting a face full of disinfected product. So it's important to make sure you realize how long it's going to take and modify your plans on how to do this application system. So the difference between foggers and misters is all due to particle size. The foggers create much smaller ones, 10 micron in size, and it's like its name says, it creates a fog cloud. It kind of hangs there for a while, and it allows it to meander through the room and land on all the surfaces eventually. The misters, more like a rain cloud. You get tiny droplets, 200 microns in size, but they fall out of the air a little faster than the foggers do. So that's the main difference between the applications of those. And again, like I said, you have to make sure the chemistries you're going to go use have either already shown that to EPA that they can be used with these types of delivery systems, or that they're going to be doing that. EPA usually restricts on when you can make changes to labels, but they're trying to be adaptive and allow for earlier changes to labels based on the use with the electrostatic sprayers, foggers, and misters. But you still need to do the research. They still need to provide the data that shows that it does work under these use conditions. So that's a lot of science. So I'll move on to what we're trying to do right now in the TURI lab. We're looking at best practices on how can we limit the exposure to the virus, as well as reducing the risk to the people actually applying these disinfectants and chemicals and processes to the surfaces, as well as the people who will be using these items or these spaces after you've done the disinfecting. Because we really don't want to eliminate a virus but make everyone sick from something else. So it's definitely that balancing act, delivering something safely and to make sure that everyone is safe. So our initial testing, which actually has started maybe 2 weeks ago, we're looking at comparing the hypochlorous acid, electrolyzed water, and NADC tablets to the traditional sodium hypochlorite bleach solutions. We're looking at not the SARS-CoV-2 virus itself, but we're looking at a surrogate called the MS2 bacteriophage, which is actually a harder to kill organism than SARS-CoV-2. It's just safer for the lab workers to be handling. So we're looking at how well these chemicals will kill off the bacteria of the virus. And we're looking at what the concentration is, what parts per million do we need for the free chlorine, and how long does it have to sit on the surface. We've gone through right now with some of the hypochlorous acids products, and we're finding 30-second contact time, you're getting a 5-log reduction. So that's 99.999% removed. That's really great, really. That's if we can get it lower than 30 seconds, just think about how people actually apply a disinfectant in the real world. There's not many people that are going to apply it to a surface, walk away, come back in 10 minutes, and then wipe it down. 30 seconds, you might be able to get them to do correctly. 15 seconds is more likely. So that's one of the things that we're trying to tweak the best, what concentration and what contact time can we get it down to show positive results. So that's just taking care of how well do these work. And I also had mentioned that we're concerned about, yeah, they work, but we still want to make sure that we're not making anybody sick or it's safe to be used. So one of the main concerns around these chlorine-based disinfectants is the emission of chlorine gas. How can we measure that during several different phases of the use of this product? Either during the creation of it, either mixing it, or the electrolyzed water charging station. When you apply it, is it through the electrostatic spraying? Is it manual wiping? How long does it have to stay on the surface? If it does cause issues, you can have a high exposure rate if it has to sit on the surface for 10 minutes, but we found that it's effective at 30 seconds. Are you ever going to get to that point where that potential exposure isn't going to be reached? So those are the kind of the things we're trying to flesh out here, is to show, yes, there may be a risk, but the risk is mitigated because it's such a shorter time and you're not exposed to it as much as you need to be able to have the issues. So like I said, we're looking at the different delivery systems as well. So we're also going to be in another kind of parallel track, which hasn't started yet, is we want to look at the other chemicals on the EPA the DFE list of safer active ingredients. So you can see those ones again. We're also going to be looking at UVC and, like I had mentioned, the general purpose cleaners. I like to circle back around to steam, because if you were paying attention, you heard me say clean first, clean second, and then talk about disinfecting. This may be one of those few times that I'd be happy to be wrong and show that steam, because it's not the chemistry doing the disinfecting, it's the temperature, you might actually be able to do disinfection and cleaning at the same time and having short contact times. So that's something that we've started to put together the matrix of what we're looking at. So this is something that we're actively doing right now, is looking at steam, cleaning, disinfecting, dirty, disinfecting, real world disinfection all at the same time. You know, looking at it, worst case scenario, you have a dirty floor that, you know, you want to make sure it's disinfected. Will this work? So that's going to take a little more time for us to be able to figure out the ways to get the virus into the soil, onto the surfaces, but if it works, it would be a really great thing to be able to show people. That's the one I'm most excited about. So Ken talked about rolls. I prefer donuts, so do not forget that we are here to help. So my donut is this one right down here. If anyone wants to send me one, I will not turn it away. Okay, so with that, Pam.
Thank
I will
you,
stop sharing my
Jason.
screen.
Thank you, Jason. And I saw that Ken gave you the big thumbs up on the
All right.
donuts. That's good. So we do have plenty of time for some Q&A, which is great. And I have several questions that have been posted on the chat. Also, some really great resources that people attending this webinar have been sharing. So that's wonderful. Thank you all so much. I'm going to just try to summarize some of the questions and then open it up for any other questions that may arise. We had a question earlier on about if soap and water are able to disable the virus, why do we disinfect as often as CDC recommends?
Well, I kind of hope I answered that question, but I can go over it again.
Just really quickly.
Well, like I said, the outer layer of the virus does have a fatty layer to it. Whether or not these degreasing products can get there to that level and deactivate that outer layer theoretically is possible, but is it possible in a real world setting? So that's something that we're looking into as well.
Really important question. If disinfectants are pesticides, are they still covered under HAZCOM? And I know, Lynn, you had spoken to that as well. If you want to share your video and maybe respond, that would be great.
Sorry, I just had a sick kid come in. I missed the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I apologize, Lynn. It was a question about if disinfectants are pesticides, are they still covered under the HAZCOM requirement?
Well, Elise wrote in the chat box that they weren't, and I thought, I think that's a DLS question, Department of Labor Standards. I assume that anything that's hazardous, and I wrote a fact sheet that's on the website that compares the information in the pesticide label than what's in the SDS, because EPA did not adopt the global harmonized system. So what you see is in the safety data sheet, there will be a section somewhere near the end, I mean, not always, in the regulatory section, maybe after section 12, that talks about the EPA pesticide label information. And often you'll see a discrepancy where they'll talk about a corrosive and then you look at the SDS information and it's not a corrosive. So I have sent that to EPA to look at, but there is a safety data sheet generated for those, and we just assume that you have to train on all hazardous products. So if Department of Labor Standards is on the line, which I thought they were, maybe they could answer that question.
Yep, Elise, do you want to share? Let's move on and we'll see if we can't get her to respond later on. But thank you. Yeah, so it's an important thing to think about. You know, there was the question that was raised, why was the eco logo not included in your list of standards, third-party certification standards that people can look for when they're looking for safer products? We did try to respond to that a bit on the chat, but I'm wondering if, you know, Carol or Lynn, you have anything you want to add to that? Why we did not include eco logo on our list of third-party certifications?
Carol?
I can address that. We didn't include them because they allow quats in their disinfectants. And that is something that we don't want to recommend to people.
Great. So thanks. So several questions on the chat and discussion about how much is too much disinfection, and also what are the long-term effects associated with using disinfectants. And you know, the difference between delivery method has been coming up quite a bit. We have a couple of people have noted that use of foggers and misters really probably should not be encouraged. So just, you know, can you comment, any one of you want to comment on, you know, how much disinfecting might be too much? What do you think the minimum amount of disinfecting, based on what we know at this point, should be for schools?
A lot of it comes down to is the perception that schools and places, I kind of mentioned this before, you know, we have to be doing something. We have to show them that we're doing something. So there may be more going on that needs to be done. There are science out there that's saying how long this virus will last on a surface, and sometimes it's hours. And if you're, or maybe a day or so on certain types of surfaces, if you're not going to be in that room for overnight, is it necessarily to disinfect that room? It really does depend on, you know, that kind of situation like that. If it's over the weekend, do you really need to do anything on Friday? If you're coming in on Monday and no one's been in there, is there going to be anything left in that room?
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely is have to rethink what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. It's just, a lot of people are just saying, well, I have to do something. And so that's why you see what you see.
And with the, sorry, Pam, just to piggyback off of Jason, with the anxiety and with the lack of supplies and materials, Jason didn't mention the ortho bug sprayer applicator that people have been buying off the shelves at Home Depot to apply disinfectant. So there's a lot of people spraying a lot of product out there. So are we overusing? Absolutely. And to the point where it's impacting the health of people in the building, but it's also impacting the building itself. We're losing finishes on floors. We're delaminating doors. We're taking the finish off of hardware because we're overspraying, overusing as a reaction to something that we should really be paying attention to and doing it right.
And Lynn, you've worked with schools to develop a schedule for when and how often to do disinfecting?
I think the problem, what I found was everybody says do it more frequently and nobody says how often. And so it's really, in the guidance that we developed was really based on use and like the buildup of like a film on a surface, how often it's used and frequency. So maybe you're cleaning in between. I mean, part of the problem is that you can't be applying these disinfectants while the occupants are in the space. So maybe you're cleaning in between more often. Part of what we're up against is that when you tell people you can clean with microfiber and then maybe disinfect in the evening, you get pushback because people are afraid that cleaning is not effective enough. So in order to reduce exposure to staff and students, it would be better to be cleaning touch points during the day. And I know a lot of schools are using their equipment at night, which would cause more of an exposure. So there is no formula except to look at frequency of use and then access to be able to clean and disinfect.
So it's really site specific, application specific, you know.
Right, which is why in the guidance that we developed on touch points, we prefaced it with this is the criteria you need to think about to develop it for that space.
Mm-hmm. And again, all of those materials are available on our website, and we will be including the recording from this webinar on our website as well. So there has been some good discussion on the chat about the HAZCOM issue. So thank you all for sharing what you know there. One question that came up is how do you determine what the proper personal protective equipment is for the way that you're doing disinfection? Go ahead, Lynn.
So they tell you, look at the safety data sheet, and typically or often they're not very explicit. And I've spent a lot of time calling the manufacturer to find out exactly what kind of equipment. But I've also worked with the Department of Labor Standards to find one type of glove. Like, so we've talked about use of nitrile gloves. So long as you're not immersing your hands in, you know, your gloves into a product for any length of time, the nitrile glove will cover most of them. And so we recommend, so that you're not defatting your hands and you're not causing exposures, we recommend the nitrile gloves for all cleaning and disinfecting products. And then most people are not going to use goggles during the whole time they're disinfecting, so we make an emphasis on when you're dispensing the concentrate.
That they use some sort of eye protection at that point, at the least. Anything to add to this?
I just want to note one problem, and I apologize. The problem with the label not talking about the use of products in certain applicators is that when you look for the personal protective equipment and you look for the precautions, it's not there because that product was not designed to be used in that type of applicator. So there is really limited precaution information about using certain disinfectants in the applicators.
Okay. So speaking of the applications, you know, we've got the electrostatic sprayers, the foggers, and the misters. And again, there's been some good chat, conversation going on around the, you know, the wisdom of using these applicators. And as Ken mentioned, you know, some people are turning to pesticide applicators, which are either even larger drops. In fact, one person mentions that it is that the smaller the droplet size, the more inhalable a disinfectant might be. And so they actually were wondering, should we actually move towards a larger droplet? Would that actually be preferable? I'm not sure we have direct answers to these, but your thoughts. Ken, do you have any response to that?
So I haven't had a chance to really digest the entire report, but Green Seal released a guidance. Julia Wolf from OSD was kind enough to forward it along to us. And in that guidance, it's talking about where you can use those, what times you can use them, when you can use them. You know, if you're using electrostatic sprays, the space should be unoccupied. They do not recommend foggers. But I've seen some crazy stuff out there. I saw someone using a Wagner power painter, sanitizing, you know, things at an outdoor facility. So just be cautious. And to Lynn's point, knowing what chemicals you can and can't use in that equipment. Your suppliers don't know. So what they're going to tell you is, yes, you can buy this, you know, you can buy this electrostatic sprayer and you can put your own product in it. You're all set. Well, that's not a true statement. So you as the owner, you as the person applying the product, you can't always rely on the information you're getting from your sales support team because they might not know, because everything's changing so quickly. You know, they're selling products that they didn't even have on the shelf last week because it's a substitute. So we're seeing a lot of that. But when it comes down to it, mechanical removal with a microfiber towel is still the safest. You spray into the towel, you wipe down. Timing wise, labor wise, we don't have that luxury. So that's when you have to look at these other tools. The electrostatic sprayers seem to be a good option that's going to accomplish us getting more areas and more high touch points covered. Whereas, you know, mechanically removing it with a microfiber, we just wouldn't be able to.
Mm-hmm. So it raises a question for me, which is availability of applicators. So if the preference is an electrostatic sprayer, how available are those? How much do they cost? Will schools be able to get their hands on them?
So they were back ordered to Christmas. I mean, Ken can attest to this. So that was our experience. So I found a US manufacturer who does the backpacks at a reasonable price. And what we did was we hooked them up with somebody on state contract on FAC 85, and we were able to get them within a couple of weeks. But the other ones, the Victory sprayer, some of the other sprayers are not available. Ken, I don't know what your experience is, but these backpack sprayers, the Sandy Pros are.
There's a used one on eBay for around $2,500 if you were interested. I was scoping those out earlier. The handheld backpack sprayers like the Victory that protects us, those kind of units, they're between $700 and $1,000 a piece for the unit. The backpacks, the pricing goes up, and like Lynn said, they're back ordered. So if people haven't purchased them yet or haven't put in a purchase order yet to your manufacturer, put the purchase order in, because that's when the clock starts ticking. And treat your suppliers nice, because if they have 100 ordered and only receive 10, who do you think is going to get them? The 10 people that were nice and accommodating and polite and sweet versus continually harping on them. It's human nature. We're all stressed out. I get it. But be nice to these people because they're overwhelmed as well. They're ordering, 2 tractor trailer fulls of stock to replenish their supplies, and they're being delivered 2 pallets. So now they have to figure out who are they going to divvy out their equipment and their supplies to. It's a hard thing right now. Everyone's hit really hard with it. There was rumblings of a supplier out of Canada having a couple thousand. There was a rumbling that Home Depot National Sales came up with 1,200 of them. I don't even know if they still have them or not. It's like trying to find a unicorn. It's really a hard thing to do. But maybe you can borrow from other communities. Maybe you can figure out how to cycle them in. I hear communities sharing them between schools, sharing them between the school department and the police station, fire station, so that way they'll get them on a schedule and a rotation. So that way they're really utilizing that asset that they have because you can't get them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
sorry, go ahead, Lynn.
No, yeah, so Sani Pro, we got it on the MHEC, the Mass Higher Education Collaborative. You can contact NextGen. So you can get it through the contract. We were able to get them within a couple of weeks. They were available as of a couple of weeks ago. And that's the nice thing about getting them off a contract.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've provided links to those resources, Lynn, in your slides. And we've also provided links to the FAC 85, which has been mentioned a couple of times. It's also been linked to in the chat. So it's a great resource that people should be aware of. Ken, did you have something to add? I think you froze up again. Sorry, Ken. So one last question.
I'll put up a link to MHEC's contract. Yeah, I'll put up a link to the contract.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. So one other question, somebody said, well, why are you recommending microfiber cloths instead of just regular cloths? Jason responded to that, but I thought it would be worth just talking about a bit as well.
Yeah, I responded to the group. It's just the microfiber towels are designed to be able to capture and remove soils and in essence, microorganisms from the surface. If done correctly, you can get up to a 3-log reduction, so 99.9% removal just using a wet microfiber towel by itself. Now, remember, this doesn't actually kill it. It just takes it from one surface, puts it on the towel. So that's why Lynn was talking about fold it in half, flip it around the other way so you don't put it back on the next surface you go to. In the end, you have to treat that microfiber like it's infected with the organisms, and you have to treat it with a disinfectant or some other process to make sure it's gone. Either letting it sit for a week before you reuse it, or you put it through the washing machine and remove everything that way. So they're more efficient. The person who had asked the question was talking about their concerns about microfiber, microplastics, and things like that. So the higher end microfibers you use, the less likely this is going to happen. If you put them into the dryers, it shortens their life, so they'll break down. Their splayed ends will melt off, and so they're not as effective.
So good guidance there. Don't put your microfiber cloths into the dryer. Okay, so we have time for a couple of more questions. There's one here about where do we get resources or sharing ideas on how different schools are handling cleaning and disinfecting in between classes. This person said, I'm on a local board of health, and without collaboration would be very, unsure about how to respond. They're in a hotspot state and would love to steal and support ideas from other municipalities.
She had sent, I don't know if she sent it to the whole group as well, but she had sent it to me and I reposted it because I don't think she's on it anymore.
Okay.
That's why I
And
think-
you reposted it to me. Thanks,
Yeah.
Jason. Yeah,
you're
see, I want the donut in the far right corner. I love my payment. So again, it's tricky, and think about it, with your communities, the age level of the students. Elementary kids can clean it with a neutral cleaner, a Green Seal certified or DFE certified neutral cleaner that they can touch, they can use, and they can wipe down their desks during the day. That because they're going to be spending a lot of time there. We're not worried about that age level of disinfecting their desks because same student, same desk. They're not changing desks. They're not swapping. There's no cross-contamination issues. We can disinfect things at night. They can just keep them clean during the day. The tricky part is the high school because of the high school schedule. We're hearing people trying to set up alternate desks. If you're going back with a hybrid model and a classroom has 24 desks in it, well, you put X's on 12 of them to let people know don't use those desks because those are disinfected for the next class. People are trying to be really creative. That's what, we track down, we're trying to track down that one Betco product right now, but we're trying to find others. That's, a sanitizer disinfectant that doesn't require PPE. So again, it's, under the age of 18, they're not an adult, but at the same time, they're likely bringing in disinfectant wipes from home that are going to be wiping down their desks. So I'd rather give them, a category 4 disinfectant that doesn't require PPE that we can track and trace. So it might be a system where the kids and the teachers and the staff and everyone get on board with something where, every class, one student is required to go and spray the surfaces. So that way you leave 2 minutes at the end of class, everyone get up, one student goes around with the bottle, sprays them all down, wipes them down, lets them sit for 5 minutes because that's the dwell time on it. Then they go to the next class. So that way it has time to sit and disinfect. Again, I think we're over focusing on surfaces a lot. And I know this is all about cleaning, but the virus doesn't transfer as easily from touching a surface. The virus doesn't transfer as easily for children. So, this is like Lynn was talking about, a 3-pronged approach. This is part of our approach. This is something that we have to do. We know there is a risk, but is it our highest risk? No, it's not. So wearing masks, washing hands, all that kind of fun stuff, all adds on to the equation. But if you can figure out how to convince your community that using, a DFE certified, super safe disinfectant that students can actually use on a desk in between classes, that probably makes the most sense. As far as high touch points during the day, we had this discussion yesterday in another call. Can you use your electrostatic sprayers while school is in session to get those high touch points? Well, electrostatic sprayers, you're supposed to use in an unoccupied space. And I think Lynn talked about it that, when you go into a classroom, you start at the back of the room and you back your way out. So that way you're not walking through the mist. It's not like you're going out on a hot date and you spray some cologne in the room and kind of walk through the vapor so that way you smell sexy. It's not that. You back your way out of the classroom. So if a class is in session and you want to, use your electrostatic sprayer on the exterior doorknob to try and get some of those high touch points, I think that's okay. But don't go into the classroom with the sprayer while class is in session and say, oh, I got to get the pencil sharpener that's on my schedule. So there's a lot of communication and a lot of planning that happens. So hopefully that kind of helps maybe.